read about what's happening right now in the future. Someday, maybe in 20 years or 30 years, our school children across Ireland will open their history books and they will come upon a chapter saying Palestine. And they will read about the tens of thousands of people killed, about the children pulled from the rubble and the people starved under blockade.
Deputy Cummins, I am very sorry, but we have to conclude the debate for 12 o'clock and I have to put the question. So I'd ask you to conclude.
It's not right.
Thank you.
It's not right. It's not right. Several times other people went over their speaking time.
We have a 12 o'clock.
Several times.
I appreciate that. Deputy, we have a 12 o'clock deadline. I'm afraid I don't make the rules. The rule is 12 o'clock for leaders' questions. Well, pardon? Well, well, I appreciate then that we will continue, but it means this is what happens when people go over their time. Deputy Cummins. Thank you. With the consent of all members, yes.
Thank you. As I was saying, the hospitals, homes and humanity itself reduced to dust. And they will read about a world that watched, and they will ask us, they will ask every one of us, what did you do? And what did Ireland do? And I ask every deputy here, what will you say? As a mother of 4, I really struggled to watch the TV. I struggled to see those children in cloths who are dead, those babies. And I saw a mother in the paper today. I actually have to say, I thought I might break down crying here today. I'm not going to, because the look on her face, it's not only the death of her child, but it's the death of humanity. And be under no illusion, what's happening in Gaza can happen here. It can happen in this country. And we will be pleading with the international community to please, God, do something for us. Do anything. They'll be despairing. We'll be despairing. We will be desperate. And the death will continue like it is there. And this motion isn't symbolic. It's very clear. And it's not that we don't want it in our money being used for this. We don't want the silence to continue. To facilitate Israeli bonds is to invest quite literally in the machinery of occupation, apartheid and annihilation. And we have a choice. The people of Gaza do not. So I'm asking, please, can every deputy vote with their conscience this evening and support this motion?
Thank you. Deputy O'Callaghan.
I want to thank everybody who's contributed to this cross-party motion and who's spoken today. Let's be very clear about this. The Minister and the Government are hiding behind technicalities and standard arguments that are wheeled out to justify inaction. The Government could act on this if they want to. The Central Bank is independent, that is correct. But as Deputy Catherine Connolly has pointed out, they are not independent of the law. And we, as elected members, elected by the people of Dáil Éireann, we have a role and a mandate to enact legislation and enact emergency legislation in this regard. We have a responsibility to do so. As my colleague, Deputy Sinead Gibney, pointed out, the Central Bank themselves have said that a legal basis for refusal of approval of the prospectus for these bonds would be national restrictive measures. And of course, as the Dáil, we could do that. The Government have said they won't bring forward emergency legislation because it will be open to legal challenge. That is meaningless language to use. Every piece of legislation brought through this Dáil is, of course, open to legal challenge. If that was the threshold, this Government would never enact any legislation whatsoever. We have clear advice, independent advice from the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisor that measures on this would be in compliance with Irish law, EU law and international law. It's utterly wrong for the whip to be used this evening on backbench government TDs in this. They should be given a free vote to vote with their conscience on this. And every TD this evening has a responsibility to do so. We've had at least 54,000 people killed, probably many more, in Gaza, and we need action on this now. How much longer is it going to take for us to have action on this? What would it take for the government to take action on this? These bonds are being used to help fund genocide, to help fund bombs landing on the heads of people in Gaza. So we need every TD in this Dáil to vote this evening for this emergency legislation, to enact emergency legislation to stop the facilitation of the sale of these bonds.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. And that concludes the debate. And the question is that the amendment be made. Is that agreed? Agreed. And we now, no, sorry, not agree. So the deputies in favour say Tá. Deputies against say Neil. Question is carried. Vote all. So the division is deferred until the weekly division this evening. Thank you, deputies. And just, I was glad to hear everyone say how unfair it was that you may have had to conclude in time. So I would like all members on both sides of the House to understand the consequences of going over your time and how unfair that is. Now, we proceed to leaders' questions. And understanding Order 38, I call on Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
Taoiseach, this so-called rent reform plan that you announced yesterday is a shambles. You are literally all over the place, confused by your own back-of-the-envelope proposal and unclear as to what you're saying. There is one thing that is clear. Your plan will push up rents even further. It's only a question of when renters will be hit. You'll allow landlords themselves to set a market rate for rent. After March 1st and throughout the course of next year, tens of thousands of renters will face higher rents. Some will pay full market rent at the start of their tenancy, and all will face big hikes at the end. Tenants entering new build properties will be hit with market level rent on day one, and with rent increases tied to inflation thereafter, they're set to see their rent rise sharply. So Fianna Fáil rolls the dice on housing once again. And you do all of this with no guarantee that it will lead to any significant increase in supply. The Housing Agency is very clear on that score. Even in the most optimistic of scenarios, your plan will see high-end apartments in exclusive pockets of Dublin charging eye-watering rent. But in the rest of Dublin, in every other county, there will be no extra supply, but there will be much higher rents. In fact, Taoiseach, there's a very real danger that your plan will actually tighten supply as landlords now delay putting properties back on the market in order to charge a higher rent from next March. You say that you will extend the rent protection to the 20% of renters who you have left behind over a number of years. These, as you know, are rural areas. They've been hit by double-digit rent increases already. And if you don't act to extend that protection immediately, these renters are put at immediate risk of big rent hikes as landlords move to get ahead of your changes. Then, Taoiseach, we come to the confusion that you sowed in this chamber yesterday. It was clear from the statement issued by Minister Brown at lunchtime that your plan is to allow all landlords to apply full market rent at the end of 6-year tenancies. This clearly meant people staying in an existing property signing a new tenancy agreement, along with people moving into a property for the first time. And then you were caught out. So throughout the afternoon, you scrambled around denying that this was the case, and then sometime in the evening, somebody slipped off and bizarrely changed the press release on the department website with a new wording, a wording that changes nothing. See, this isn't about protecting renters at all. This is about making renters carry the can for your failure in housing. So you will allow record rents to be hiked up in the pitiful hope that big investors will save the day. The same casino behaviour that created this mess in the first place. Tá the flean maidir le cias imithe an ábhar idir námh réiteach agus námh inluacht. An tain rud atá cinse nó go raci cias in áide gan aon cinnteach go dtiocfaí feabhas ag sa láthair. Taoiseach, why are you delaying extending the rental protection until March? Why are you allowing landlords to set the market rate rent themselves? And can you tell us, what analysis have you done? Tell us how many renters will be hit by massive rent increases from the 1st of March under your plan?
Thank you, Deputy.
Dúspáir ní éon tíim leis an taachta, ní léon buint leis an méadtá ráiteach leis an íreanna, ach níl síime ag an taachta leis an íreanna. Má sé tá gceist ag an taachta agus pártaí Sinn Féin ná bheith ag gcuine gach éon cinenne dhéanaan an rialtas, agus gan éon policy saléir a chuir os cóir an bubble. Sin bun agus spar a made atá right a gut agus ní ein team that. And just because you keep on saying untruths doesn't make them true, Deputy. I mean, the fundamental reality is existing tenants will stay and will be capped at 2%. That is clear. Any new tenancies after March of 2026, after legislation, will be capped by the CPI. That is also very clear. But you have sought to sow confusion, because of course you condemned this before you even saw the detail of it over the weekend. During the last couple of months, you declared that RPZs would be eliminated. You didn't expect this package of measures. And there really comes a stage when you need to start proposing solutions, because supply is the bottom line here. And this is a balanced package of measures which protects existing tenants but gives policy certainty to them and also gives policy certainty to investment and to investors, which is required to dramatically increase the supply of housing and apartments to the country, to get from 30-odd thousand to 50,000 per annum for a sustained period of time. I see nothing in anything you have proposed that would go anywhere near trying to attempt to increase supply of apartments and supply of housing. And I listened to you this morning, and it was all bluff and bluster on Morning Ireland. You know, you're back to the vulture funds. And you then said this morning that if the government is intent on using institutional funds, they are on the wrong track. Well, go back a few weeks and just replay what your Deputy Ona Bryn said on Virgin TV, where he acknowledged and recognised a role for institutional funds in the Irish market.
Please.
So who do I believe here? Do I believe you this morning? Do I believe O'Brien that you either believe there's a role for institutional funds, or when it's into politics you just change the term and call it vulture funds because it plays well, or you think it plays well? But it's just cliche bingo kind of announcements. That's all you're at. You know? And I heard you this morning, and it was just bluff and bluster. And the bottom line here is, I have answered the questions. And if you look in terms of what, for example, Threshold have said, Threshold are very clear that the changes announced today will, with well-designed legislation and effective enforcement, will be a huge jump forward in providing long-term stability to renters. They welcome the national extension of rent pressure zones, and we will be bringing in legislation to deal with that specifically as quickly as we can. And in the next week or two, I would like legislation before government on that specific point of extending, which is something you should welcome, not just attack again and try and pick holes in something. It's a good measure, and it's something that people called for.
Sorry, Deputy, your leader's quite capable of asking the question.
Threshold are saying,
now, please,
for the first time, private renters could have secure occupancy of their home for a set period, something that does not currently exist. And you're attacking all of this, and you're making false assertions, absolutely false assertions, because all you are interested in is the politics of this. How can I exploit the housing situation to gain sort of electoral or political gain for the party?
Thank you, Taoiseach.
You have no solutions, no proposals in
MacDonald?
terms of the supply side of it.
Deputy MacDonald.
So the only person who has managed to sow confusion is yourself, Taoiseach, ably assisted by Minister Brown. You certainly sowed confusion. I'm very glad you were listening so attentively to me this morning. I hope you heard my appeal again to stop screwing things up. It's almost as though you deliberately set out to make a mess repeatedly of things. You are the Taoiseach, you're accountable to the House. I've put questions to you. They are reasonable and fair questions. They're the questions that renters all across the state are asking. Because here's your fair and balanced package. For the investments, yes, cuckoos and vultures, what do they get? They get the opportunity for a higher rent yield. That's the attraction into the market to boost supply, as you would have it. And of course, they pay not 1 cent in tax on their rent roll. That's nice, isn't it? That's for them. And then what for the renter? The only certainty is that rents will rise. You might, when you take to your feet, answer the questions that I asked you originally in respect of rolling out protections. And what analysis have you done in respect of rents going up?
The Housing Agency provides the platform for the review that the government has acted on. We've acted, we've taken decisions. I'm not hanging around here. I'm not interested in your bluff and bluster, because it'll contribute nothing to housing supply in this country. That is the bottom line. And I did listen to you this morning. And you say to me, back of the envelope stuff. Yeah. And what does Deputy MaryLouMcDonald say? Government wants to take the shackles off the big funds. Great soundbite. I've asked the government to stop screwing things up. And then when asked about Sinn Féin's alternative plan, enable the builders to just get out and build. What a fantastic plan. What a really detailed plan. Really is going to get things going, isn't it, Deputy MaryLouMcDonald? And then you say, of course you condemn the vultures and cuckoos, but Deputy Owner Breen, meanwhile, will meet with them. He will recognise the role of institutional in his attempts to be super cerebral in discussing these issues, but you'll come in and go on about cuckoos and vulture funds because it plays well to what you consider to be your base. And then you finish then, you then finish by saying, here's my solution, Mary Lou says, for the love of God, get the builders building, says Mary Lou. That's my plan.
Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Get off to them.
Deputy Bacik. Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Taoiseach, it's 20 years since we saw distressing footage of conditions at Lees Cross nursing home. And here we are again. The scenes on last Thursday's RT Investigates programme were deeply disturbing. Niamh Hegarty's team exposed horrifying practices in nursing homes run by one of Ireland's largest private care providers. And I want to commend the RTE team and the whistleblower, Claire Doyle, for exposing those abuses. We saw awful footage, Taoiseach. Older people being pushed around, forgotten, abandoned, calling for help from their beds or after a fall. Often residents left to soil themselves, and shortages of basic equipment like hoists, sanitary wipes and gloves. We saw staff making makeshift bed sheets out of incontinence pads. Taoiseach, older people are being demeaned, degraded and dehumanised in some private nursing homes, and profiteering is at the root of this. 80% of Irish nursing homes are private or voluntary, and shockingly, just 10 investment funds own 1/3 of all nursing home beds in the system. An influx of investment funds in recent years has left our country, indeed, with the most privatised system of care in the EU. So big corporations are profiteering from, in some cases, negligent care of older people, mistreated in private homes so that companies can make a quick buck. Taoiseach, the residents of Lees Cross, of the residents in Benavon Manor and of many so-called care facilities have over the years paid a high price for state tolerance of an unacceptable status quo. But if we're honest, can we truly say we're shocked? And of course, I do acknowledge some things have changed since Lees Cross. HICWA was set up to set the standards, to inspect and indeed shut down non-compliant nursing homes, public and private. But what we know now, Taoiseach, is that clearly HICWA is failing in this duty. Families who review a particular nursing home for their loved ones, the first thing they do is check the HICWA report, and that's what the family of Audie and Guy did. But families, in relying on information from HICWA, may unwittingly be putting their relatives in harm's way. So, Taoiseach, clearly HICWA practice is unfit for purpose and must urgently be reviewed. And the Health Minister needs to explain why it's HICWA that has now been called upon to conduct the so-called independent review of all nursing homes. Particularly strange after it glaringly failed to identify abusive practices at Benavon that some journalists and a carer with a camera found. And this was not an isolated incident. We're all hearing this, Taoiseach. I'm aware of one nursing home employee who's not received so much as an acknowledgement of her complaint from HICWA, 5 months after she submitted the complaint. Another person contacted me, told by HICWA that HICWA would not investigate the care received by her now deceased mother. The Ombudsman would not investigate. A substantial complaint, among other things, an unforgivable failure to provide her mother with necessary medications. So, Taoiseach, we need now urgently to review the system. Have you confidence in HICWA's ability to review nursing home care in Ireland? And how can families have any level of trust in HICWA reports, having seen what we saw last week?
First of all, I'm going to thank the Deputy very much for raising this issue. I think it's a very, very serious and shocking situation. The revelations on RT Investigates, in particular, must have been deeply traumatic for families with loved ones in nursing homes generally, but particularly in the 2 nursing homes that were covered by RT Investigates. And it is particularly concerning that the regulatory authority did not capture this or did not unearth this in the context, in particular of one nursing home in terms of its reviews. And I think HEQA, when it was established, it came out of Quality and Fairness in 2002, the then health strategy. I was involved in it at the time and setting it up on an interim basis. Prior to that, we didn't have a quality authority in health. And so it has done a lot of impactful and effective work over the years. But it is deeply concerning that, and I think there has to be a review by HEQA itself too, in terms of what went wrong here, in terms of not, if you like, doing and revealing what was subsequently revealed. And I do pay tribute to the team in RT Investigates on this. And maybe methodologies have to change in relation to inspection. Also, I think penalties have to be reviewed in terms of either fines or indeed closure. Closure creates its own issues in terms of alternative location, but there has to be real consequences for horrific treatment of senior citizens in this matter. And that is something I believe in. I think the family and Audie and Guy has spoken eloquently, very distressingly, I think, to hear in terms of their family situation and in terms of their acceptance of the impartiality and sort of belief in the HEQA reports as they checked the record, if you like, of given homes and following the inspection reports. Our overall system, there's the public service sector side of it, which we did invest significantly in the last number of years, but a lot of that investment was in modernising and refurbishing district hospitals, which had been on the list for quite a long time in terms of the necessity for refurbishment. And then the HSE works with certain homes in terms of providing HSE beds, so to speak, particularly for dementia cases, where extra and additional supports are required. And thirdly, home care has expanded enormously. So in the last 4 years alone, we have doubled provision in home care.
Thanks,
from
Taoiseach.
about 400 million to 800 million, and consequently additional hours and so on.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Bacik.
I'll come back later.
Taoiseach, I listened carefully to the answer, but I didn't hear anything substantive about what you and the government propose to do following on those shocking revelations. And there's it's not just about HIQA failures. This is also about ensuring that older persons have a voice. There is a blueprint there. We have a Law Reform Commission report from last year about setting up an adult safeguarding framework. Safeguarding Ireland last week called upon you again to initiate a process which would lead to the enactment of this necessary legislation, which would challenge that culture of systemic ageism. And I think we have to call it out. It's that culture that has enabled the growth of this appalling for-profit system that has facilitated the carrying out of abuse on vulnerable older citizens. And all of us are hearing from older persons who are so fearful now about their own futures, about futures for their relatives, for themselves, given the lack of safeguards in the system. So, Taoiseach, will you adopt the process that Safeguarding Ireland and the Law Reform Commission have so clearly set out about adult safeguarding legislation and ensuring older persons are protected?
Yes, government has made that clear. We will be doing that. It's in the programme for government. Then there's a forthcoming national policy on adult safeguarding for the health and social care sector, and that set out how existing protections will be strengthened. That will be brought to government shortly, and that will commit to the development of adult safeguarding legislation for the sector. We've included a health bill in its current adult safeguarding bill in our current legislative programme to actually facilitate this. On the more broader sense, however, Deputy, we're looking at a combination. I'm trying to be realistic here and respond meaningfully to what you've articulated, which I don't disagree with a lot of what you've said. But there will be a necessity for increased public sector provision. There'll be a necessity for continuing private sector provision and increasingly more home care provision, quite a significant amount of which will be private. So regulation will always be key here, both of public and of private. But I do believe there should be a rebalancing with more public service provision, particularly in the context of more acute situations around dementia and so forth. And we might get an opportunity to discuss
Cian O'Callaghan of the Social Democrats.
Taoiseach, renters are already in an incredibly stressful situation, having seen their rents doubled over the last decade, and you are now not helping the situation by sowing confusion. You did that yesterday. Your launch, in terms of the understanding of it and the contradictory messages coming out, was an absolute shambles. You're at it again today. You've told it all just a few minutes ago that new tenancies after March 2026 will be capped at CPI. Now, no mention of a reset every 6 years. No mention of that. Is the reset gone every 6 years? Your junior minister, John Cummins, yesterday told Drive Time that all new tenancies post-March 2026, the landlord will be able to reset the rent to full market levels. So is that, have you ditched the reset every 6 years, or is that still in place? Because you didn't mention it. You didn't mention it yesterday. You wouldn't mention it once, your reset of six years. Taoiseach, rents are already completely unaffordable. In Dublin 8 at the moment, just down the road from here, studio apartments are being advertised at €2,495 per month. This is £2,500 per month to live basically in one room. This is a dystopian future for renters that this government has envisaged. Instead of protecting renters, your big plan is to use them as sacrificial lambs, to bleed them dry. Incredibly, yesterday, the Minister for Housing, James Brown, claimed that rents would eventually come down, but he couldn't tell us when this was going to happen. Before being put in charge of housing, the Minister was responsible for gambling, and it now seems that he's gambling with renters' future and betting against them. Taoiseach, as a smokescreen for gutting rent pressure zones, you'll extend them across the country. By giving landlords a heads up about this, you've now incentivised them to jack up rents substantially. Furthermore, any accommodation that frees up between now and March is likely to remain vacant, so landlords can charge sky-high rents at that time and make maximum profits. Do you have any plan to deal with the hoarding of rental properties that you are now incentivising by announcing these measures? Another huge concern, Taoiseach, is the impact these measures will have on homelessness, which is already at record levels. Private rental has been a key route out of homelessness for people. That route will now be cut off because struggling families will be unable to afford the new norm of extortionate rents for new tenancies. That will mean more and more children growing up for longer without a home in emergency accommodation. Taoiseach, you were positively triumphant yesterday announcing these measures. Do you accept now that they are going to lead to huge rent increases for most renters, and that these measures will increase hardship, poverty, evictions and homelessness for renters?
Thank you, Deputy.
No, I don't, Deputy. And just because you use kind of what I would call exaggerated language doesn't make it true. And the bottom line is, I repeat again, all existing tenants will not have their rents increased beyond 2%. And no attempts by you to sow confusion will change that reality. But the more fundamental point in your presentation is this. You and your party do not believe in a role for the market. That's fundamentally, and I've listened to Deputy Hearn say this, your spokesperson. Deputy Hearn does not believe, Rory Hearn, does not believe in a role for the market. He said this. That is his position. And he said it plenty of times. But that is the bottom line. And you've undermined, I didn't interrupt
Deputy
once.
Doherty, it's not your question.
But what's intriguing is that you've attacked and condemned institutional funds.
Well, you've had your opportunity, Deputy.
Look, come on. I know your background. Am I not allowed?
Deputy Doherty.
You can. So you make them up every day, for God's sake. No, I know that. Are you the leader of the Social Democrats now?
Excuse me, deputies, if we could... Thank you. The Taoiseach, if everybody stops interrupting, you have a rebuttal, Deputy. Use it. Taoiseach, please continue.
The bottom line here is the Deputy Opposite has made assertions in his leader's questions. I'm quite entitled to respond to them. The bottom line here is supply. There's nothing coming from you on supply. The Housing Commission recommended reform of the RPZ scheme, okay? You welcomed the Housing Commission report at the time and you attacked government for failure to respond to it. I remember it well in the Dáil. All of you did. So the Minister then gets the Housing Agency to do a review of the RPZs, which are coming to expire at the end of the year anyway. When we announced that review, and I referenced a few things in February, all of you jumped up and said, you're eliminating RPZs, you're going to eliminate the rent pressure framework and so on. All untrue, all of it untrue. It was just polemics. It was sort of hysterical hyperbole. That's all it was. No substance to it at all. Because, of course, we haven't got rid of RPZs. If anything, as Threshold have said, we have significantly increased protection for renters, while at the same time, in a balanced measure, created policy certainty for investment because we desperately need more supply in the rental market. We clearly do, if we're to get to 50,000 per annum. And that's the piece you don't address at all. And you've never addressed, bar an SSIA-type investment scheme, which would take a couple of years before you have the requisite funds to invest in capital in housing. The state is already investing in capital in housing to the tune of 7 billion plus.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Now, I put the question yesterday. We need about 20 billion in terms of investment made up of private sector and public sector. Tell me how you propose to get private sector investment into the apartment
Deputy O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, you know that we've put forward proposals to bring in extra financing into housing, and your criticism saying it's going to take a couple of years. You've had decades at this, and you can't get the situation right. So a couple of years, if it takes to get more financing into the situation, it's absolutely worth it. The fact is, Taoiseach, that most renters are going to face huge rent increases. You won't even mention the 6 years that most renters are going to be facing huge rent increases at the end of 6 years of a tenancy. And most renters are going to end into these. They are going to enter new tenancies. You won't even acknowledge that. You won't acknowledge that in what you're saying. Tell us how many renters, what proportion of renters over the coming years will not face this reset to full market rents. You tell us that, Taoiseach. Most are going to face that. When they end a tenancy, they're going to be in this new system where effectively the RPZ rent regulation is ripped up on them, and they're going to face full market rents.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
All existing tenants will be capped at 2%. No, all existing tenants, when they stay in the tenancy, will be capped at 2%. Now, in terms of any new bills or new apartment bills after March 2026, when the new legislation comes in, will be capped. Would you please now listen, because you asked the question. All new apartments after March 2026 will be subject to a cap of the CPI, inflation. Okay? No, they then will, 6 years beyond that, 6 years beyond that, be subject, or the landlord will be able to reset the market. And the combination, just let me finish it now, because you've done nothing on supply. The combination of that facility for new builds, which we don't have yet, by the way, and there are no tenants in them, and the CPI, gives the basis upon bringing investment back into the market to get more apartments built, because supply ultimately is the way to moderate rents. We're not going to do it by rent freezes, Deputy. We're not going to do it by this, that and the other that you've been proposing for the last 2 to 3 years, which will only conspire to reduce and suppress supply and allow rents to go up even higher.
Deputy Paul Gogarty.
I want to talk about something that's ongoing, isn't specific to today, but it's happening every single day, every single year since the state began, but it appears to be getting worse anecdotally. And I'm talking about antisocial behaviour, and in particular antisocial behaviour for those aged under 18. Young people are invariably good. We had a discussion a while back that it was only 2% of young people ever came before the Gardaí, but a lot of our young people are now under threat from random violent assaults just by gangs going around. 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. I had parents come to me with a lad who got a punch and his eye socket was damaged. Just a random attack. Equally, I had parents walking around in the park with a buggy. 4 gangs of youths come over, throw bricks, throw sticks at them as well, verbally abuse them. If they happen to be from another country, originally racist tropes were thrown in as well. But it's abuse given to anyone. One of my local cafes, gang of lads went in, stole the bottles, walked out brazen, came back in and threw the contents of the bottles at the staff. This is happening every day. I'm not talking about the stuff that requires 4 mountain bike Gardaí from Operation Irene in an estate in my constituency where fires are lit regularly, drug dealing takes place on an everyday basis, and someone got attacked with a machete recently. That's high-level stuff that needs to be dealt with, true enough. But the lower-level stuff is what puts people in peril walking around. And many times it's the young people who are randomly attacked. So, Taoiseach, what I want to talk to you about is consequences. There were 15,813 12 to 17 referrals to Garda Youth Diversion in 2023, 15,719 in 2022. So that's 10,000 offenders versus 8,400. They're the ones who reach the threshold to get their antisocial warning, to get their ASBO, to be put onto a Garda programme. It was 15,813 12 to 17 referrals to the Garda Youth Diversion programme in 2023. They're the ones who end up getting into the system. I'm more concerned about the ones, the hangers-on of the ringleaders who shouldn't get into the system in the first place. So, Taoiseach, what I'm asking you specifically are there any further plans for consequences? I raised the issue some months back with Tánaiste Simon Harris about maybe the need to echo or at least put in some sort of restrictions, a ban or restrictions on social media for 11, 12, 13-year-olds because of the Andrew Tate-ification of what's happening, particularly with young males with no real role models in a more feminised primary school system. I've mentioned to you the nitrous oxide canisters, and you said you'd look into action on that. But Taoiseach, specifically, what plans does this government have to have consequences for actions? We know there's root causes, and I've raised those root causes before. But if someone does something, where are the consequences? Thank you,
Deputy. Taoiseach, please.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for raising what is a very real issue for many, many people in society in terms of increased antisocial behaviour. I do believe you need both approaches. You do need consistently and constantly to deal with the source of this and the evolution of this, and that means in terms of both within school programs, and I think a lot has been done in schools actually. When I visit schools a lot, there's that one recently where there was tremendous inclusivity, where the schools themselves, the children themselves were working on there was a cultural committee involving different nationalities and so on. It was very heartwarming to see. In many cases, the schools are well ahead of the rest of society. In the adolescent years and in teenage years, there was a heightened degree of antisocial behaviour, which sometimes does manifest itself in significant violence and attacks on people, and the creation of a sense of insecurity as people walk in public parks or in public streets. Now, there are consequences in terms of the use of antisocial behaviour orders. The deployment of body-worn cameras for Gardaí will help to observe stuff. Community safety partnerships and their introduction is important. Community safety plans for every area. The expansion of the youth justice and youth diversion measures. I actually think we have to do more on that, and also developing more youth programmes for young people for whom the mainstream school system isn't responding or isn't really capturing. Obviously, what I'm using isn't sort of supporting them or in a position to keep them within the conventional system. We had Youth Reach, we still have, we have many programmes, but I think a renewed effort is required to deal with this, and I think the fact that youth is now in education will help us in terms of creating a proper continuum from education to youth services, which we had before. I think area partnerships are very important to restore a community sense of ownership of these issues. Again, some of those area partnerships over the last decade or so went into decline. I've witnessed in the North East Inner City initiative where very significant progress has been made. I don't think we can just deal with it on the consequences alone, although there should be consequences. We need to consistently look at what kind of effective and impactful consequences would make a difference. We've brought in laws, as you know, to tackle antisocial use of scramblers and quad bikes and all of that. We've given additional powers to Gardaí, but I think you're talking about something a bit, as you say, less than below the level of sort of knife crime and all of that. You're talking about just general antisocial, intimidatory behaviour, attacks and so on like that. And the line
Thank you,
between
Taoiseach.
the line
Time
between
is
sort
up.
of a community engagement and moving into
Thank you.
the youth
Deputy
juvenile
Gogarty.
space is a difficult enough one to
Thank you,
crack.
Taoiseach. Deputy Gogarty.
Taoiseach, as you said, the schools are doing a great job, and it's mainly the female teachers in primary schools, but they're the ones getting the misogynistic abuse at 6th class level. We've had different debates about that. You mentioned the community safety partnerships. I wish they'd hurry up and get them set up, because there is a deficit there, and it also includes communities that aren't designated disadvantaged but have areas of disadvantage that aren't included in that. So it needs to be widespread and cover that area as well. Well, I'm a big believer in early years education. The High Scope Perry Preschool project, for every €1 has a €17 return, and we need to tackle the causes. But equally, when you're a parent of a child who's been attacked, or if you're a parent, a pregnant lady, for example, has been attacked, you want to know what the consequences are. And sometimes these guys are out parading themselves on social media. They could have 11 or 12 instances before anything happens. So I think there needs to be tougher, on-the-spot type of stuff, whether it's curfews, whether it's seizing their scooters, whether it's seizing their PlayStations, whether it's finding the parents. Add that into the mix.
Thanks,
so they
Deputy.
know there's a first-hand repercussion
Deputy
rather than
Gogarty.
waiting a year
Taoiseach.
to get through the system.
I think that's a fair presentation. I will talk to the Minister of Justice, reflecting on what you've said. There is an absence of consequences within that space between before formally referring people to juvenile justice system, which we're kind of reluctant to do, and some to give young people a chance. But on the other hand, that people can't just behave with abandon, with no consequences. I take your point, but that needs to be thought through systemically, because it's one thing to drop a list of potential consequences, and then one has implementation, one has follow through, and all of that. But I do take your point. I will talk to the Minister of Justice in relation to this, and reflect on what you've said, and see can we come back to you, and I'll ask him to talk to you about it.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And we now move to other members' questions under Standing Order 38A. I call on Deputy Michael Cahill to put his